Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. We begin in Winnipeg, where the fire paramedic service is at the forefront of a damning report first obtained by the Winnipeg Free Press. The report says racism was a factor in two firefighters' refusals to treat an Indigenous patient. With more, here's Daryl Stranger.
A 911 call was placed on October 7, 2020 for a 23-year-old Indigenous woman with a self-inflicted stab wound to the neck. Firefighters and paramedics arrived on scene. One paramedic proceeded to treat the woman. According to the report, two firefighters refused to help the paramedic. One firefighter referred to the call as, quote, just another call in the North End. The paramedic filed a complaint under the Respectful Workplace Administrative Standard about the firefighter's conduct. The report, conducted by Laurel Harris of Equitable Solutions Consulting, which APTN obtained a copy of, found, quote, the patient's social standing, race, indigeneity as the likely subject of implicit bias that affected the conduct of some members that night. The paramedic describes the conduct of one of the firefighters as causing delay in transporting the patient to hospital, compromising the patient's safety. Manitoba Métis President David Chartrand and Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Arlen Dumas both believe the firefighters involved should be fired, as well as Manitoba Liberal leader Dougal Lamont, who in a statement says, changing culture should mean if a first responder thinks they get to pick and choose who to help, they have no business working as a first responder. Now, despite the calls for the firefighters' dismissal, Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service Chief John Lane cannot say whether or not those involved will be terminated.
The disciplinary process is ongoing, and that process will involve dialogue with unions. The actual outcomes for individuals are considered to be private human resource matters and will not be discussed publicly.
Winnipeg Mayor Brian Bowman acknowledged that the city has a problem with racism.
Systemic racism we know exists within all levels of government and within every department of those governments.
As for how the city is addressing these issues, Bowman said the city has numerous initiatives in place, such as the creation and support of the Indigenous Accord and mandatory reconciliation training for all city staff. Lane says frontline workers will be required to complete anti-racism and diversity training.
More than 200 WFPS frontline leaders will be required to participate in anti-racism and diversity training. This is being organized right now and will be scheduled within the next month. Additional anti-oppression training is planned for all other employees, and the WFPS has hired 2 consulting firms to assist with a workplace cultural assessment aimed at getting honest feedback from employees about their experience working at WFPS.
The investigator reached out to the patient for the report, but the city has not yet reached out to her in regards to this incident. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A warming tent named for Raphael Andre, an Innu Naskapi man who died outside of a closed Montreal shelter 2 weeks ago, officially opened last night in Cabot Square, a downtown hub well known to the urban Indigenous population. Andre's death ignited calls for more overnight resources for the homeless. A $25,000 donation from a Mohawk couple got the ball rolling, while members of the Innu Nation coordinated and sent intervention workers to Montreal to staff the warming tent overnight. The initial plan was to erect a traditional Innu Shapaton in the square, but organizer Michelle Audette said adding shelter in any form was their main concern.
Le débat est important, il y a des vies, puis on parle de minutes maintenant. Là. Il fait fret, ils ont faim, puis il faut que ça aille plus vite. Le reste, le débat va continuer, mais en ce moment, il y a plein de gens qui veulent aider, plein de gens à travers les nations, ici au Québec, qui sont prêts à aller à Montréal pour donner un coup de main aux gens qui sauvent des vies là-bas.
An Innu community in Quebec is awaiting the results of an independent investigation after 2 men were targeted in a stop and search by provincial police officers patrolling the territory. Lindsay Richardson explains.
The Innu Council of Pessamit says racial profiling is what drove provincial police officers to detain 2 community members on ancestral territory during an intervention over the weekend.
Council says it happened on Saturday afternoon. Two Innu men in their 50s were driving on the territory Innu referred to as Nitassinan when they were intercepted by SQ officers.
Un autopatrouille qui bloquait le véhicule en avant, puis l'autre en arrière, puis l'intervention, le contact verbal a été établi par la voix du haut-parleur. C'est comme dans les films.
The men were then forced from their car in a scene Saint-Onge, himself a former police officer, describes as Hollywood-like.
Des armes de service qui ont été pointées sur les individus, les Inuits qui ont été interpellés, qui ont été arrêtés, qui ont été menottés, mis à genoux au sol, détenus à bord de l'autopatrouille.
According to Saint-Onge, the men were released without charges after a full vehicle search. It's believed they were caught in the crosshairs of an auto theft investigation, a detail the SQ would not confirm. Saint-Onge says talks between the community and police are ongoing, but the men in question are traumatized.
On a pris le dossier en main, en charge, pour éviter justement que des membres de notre Première Nation ou l'ensemble des Premières Nations du Québec n'aient à subir d'événements aussi dramatiques.
The case is now on the desk of the BEI, the independent bureau that investigates every time a civilian is injured or killed during a police intervention. Indigenous Affairs Minister Yan Lafreniere says he's following the case closely along with the province's public security minister. The BEI's report is expected in the coming weeks. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Indigenous corrections officers in Saskatchewan allege systemic racism in the workplace. They plan to launch a lawsuit that has not yet been certified or tested in court. Here's Priscilla Wolfe with more.
Jennifer Sanderson is one of two plaintiffs in a class action suit against Corrections Services Canada. Sanderson resigned from her position as a correctional guard, the Prince Albert Penitentiary, in 2017. She had worked there for 9 years, but left because of alleged workplace bullying, specifically by one coworker.
When it was going on, it was just one person that was targeting me. And, you know, some of the phrases or some of the wording that were used were blatantly and completely, there was no holding back.
Sanderson adds she had anxiety anytime he approached her.
Whenever he would begin to approach me, I knew right away. It was every time it was racial. And, you know, comments like, well, how come you're not a drunk? Or how come you never got into, you know, this kind of, like you work in a place like this. How did you manage to come out of not having to end up behind bars?
When Sanderson made a complaint to her supervisor, she didn't think it was dealt with professionally.
We'll have a talk with him. We'll talk with him over a whiskey. I'll talk with him. And I got no support. I got no employee assistance programming support, no mental health support.
So she took the next step for her own well-being.
I handed in my resignation. I put in my letter. I took my gear. And I handed it off to the people that are in charge of that. And the guy looked at me. Nice person, you know, and always so kind to me. He's like, "What are you doing?" I couldn't get my words out. I just handed off my gear and I walked away.
An investigation did take place after her resignation, but nothing came of it.
People have to be accountable. You know, this person got 2 weeks of unpaid leave for years of what was done. And the investigation was open. It wasn't only about me. There was other things that he was doing.
She decided to launch this lawsuit with a co-plaintiff who suffered similar experiences at another correctional facility. She wants compensation and changes at Correctional Services Canada. Their lawyer, Aidan Klein, says this class action may take a while for a resolution.
Class actions unfortunately take years, so we are in the very early stages. We've been assigned our judge, but we haven't been in discussions with the other side yet. We still have to set down a case management conference with the judge and put down the certification timetable. Certification is the first major step in a class action.
Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Time now for a quick break, but still to come, a man who fought back against voter fraud is vindicated. Stay with us. Welcome back. A federal review into Manitoba First Nation's election has concluded that there was voter fraud in 2017. The review was completed in November by Minister of Indigenous Services Mark Miller. With more, here's Daryl Stranger.
A federal review into Penamutang First Nation's 2017 election has concluded that voting fraud did take place. While this is not the first time that an appeal has been filed after Chief Garnet Woodhouse was elected, this time a federal review concluded there was fraud and vote buying. Part of the report from Minister of Indigenous Services Mark Miller states he is, quote, satisfied that the testimonies have concluded that during the 2017 general election, fraud and vote buying was widespread and that it may have affected the results of the election. Clarence Sumner filed the appeal in 2017. He says this decision is a positive step in the right direction.
For me, that was a victory in itself, because this isn't the only appeal I've set forth against Garnet Woodhouse and his quorum, and it's always been Garnet Woodhouse and his quorum. So, yes, it's a nice feeling to know that all the hard work me and my friends did to do this appeal in 2017 was heard.
Despite the review's conclusion, the review findings could not determine who was ultimately responsible. A statement on behalf of Chief Garnet Woodhouse and Council tells a different story, saying one person was responsible, although they have not been named. Chief Garnet declined to be interviewed and referred us to the band's lawyer, Harley Schechter.
The minister's investigation into voter fraud was centered only upon 3 votes out of all the votes that were cast. 3 votes, and involved one employee of the former chief and council who were not elected. And I know it's a little bit confusing to follow the bouncing ball, but that's the story.
Schechter added that there was another appeal in 2019, but the review found no wrongdoing in that election with the current chief and council. Sumner also filed reports in 2011 and 2019, and while unsuccessful, says he will be keeping an eye on elections in the future.
To me, that means that this can open up doors for more criminal investigation, a more thorough criminal investigation to take place. So I've already alerted my Member of Parliament, Nikki Ashton, and I've also alerted my local Gypsumville RCMP detachment. Now I'm looking forward to seeing what the RCMP is going to do. So they've already opened up a file at the local detachment here at the RCMP.
Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A proposed coal mine in southern Alberta could provide hundreds of jobs and bring in significant economic benefits. But some members of nearby Indigenous communities say those benefits don't outweigh environmental impacts and are urgently working to educate their community before the project is approved. Tamara Pimentel has those details.
The Blackfoot communities, Piikani and Kainai nations, run along the eastern slope of the Rockies. This is near the proposed site for the Grassy Mountain coal mine. All Treaty 7 First Nations have written letters of support for the project, but Piikani members like Adam North Pagan are still working to educate residents with virtual meetings.
Now that this project has kind of moved itself along, there's nation members, including myself, that are really concerned about it. And, and I think it's time to kind of put the brakes on and kind of step back and kind of look at the, look at the big picture.
The project by Australian-owned Benga Mining is a proposed steel-making coal mine that will be developed on a previous mining area. It's projected to produce around 93 million tons of coal over its 23-year lifespan. It's supposed to provide hundreds of jobs and bring in economic benefits, but thousands, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, have formed groups in efforts to stop the mine to prevent environmental damage. This Facebook group has grown to have over 24,000 members.
This is something that has not happened in Alberta. We are always at odds, and so I'm really hoping that maybe this is an educational opportunity for the general Albertan to learn about what these lands mean.
Latasha Calfrobe of the Kainai Nation created the Niitsitapi Water Protectors Group. She calls the mine an attack on tradition, culture, and livelihood.
These mountains as a whole hold the stories of how our people came to be, how we, came to steward and occupy these areas of land. There's so many things at risk here.
When the Piikani Chief and Council wrote a letter of support for the mine in 2019, North Peigan says community members were left in the dark.
We didn't really have too much information on the detail of the Grassy Mountain coal mining project that's within our territory.
Fast forward to 2021. Chief Stanley Grier of Piikani reiterated his support in another statement. The only individuals that can and should speak on behalf of the Piikani Nation on all matters related to our lands is myself, the chief, along with my council. He also wrote, Piikani Nation fully endorses the Grassy Mountain Initiative. On Piikani, strong winds are always blowing. North Peigan says one major concern among residents is the toxins that could be blown into the community.
Even though I'm all for economic benefits, but there's also a flip side to the coin, and we need to really balance that off with the, being able to protect the environment.
APTN has reached out to Piikani Chief and Council for a comment. We are unable to reach them. The Grassy Mountain coal mine is currently being reviewed by provincial and federal regulators. If it's approved, construction for the project will begin in late 2021 with coal shipments in 2023. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Well, many schools have been forced to conduct education using video conferencing. A Mi'kmaq community in the classroom sharing traditional knowledge like how to snare and skin a rabbit. Warning to viewers, this story has images of a dead bunny. Angel Moore brings us this.
This is not a typical day in class for Fearson White. This grade 6 student is learning firsthand traditional knowledge, like how to clean a rabbit, the Mi'kmaq way.
Felt kind of weird, but it's I don't know. How Mi'kmaq did it. People did it before.
This is part of the Mi'kmaq language class at the Ilnu Sibuk Jina Muwogwam School in Sabaganagati First Nation. Educational assistant John Michael shares his teachings, such as how to cut the meat to prepare for rabbit stew.
When I was growing up, my dad taught me this, and he said, if you can learn how to do this here, you'll never starve. And one of the things I remember too, it teaches a lot. It teaches with respect and how we're connected to Mother Earth and all this stuff here.
Traditional culture and identity are also part of the teachings. Instructor Greg Marr says this knowledge came far too close to being lost.
So when different things like Indian residential school came and colonization took place, it kind of displaced our traditional lands. So all of our culture, all of our traditions, they went underground, and a lot of them sacred teachings were lost.
But now some of those teachings are in the classroom. A traditional snare was made to catch the rabbit, while an elder offered tobacco in thanks for the rabbit giving its life.
To kind of close that gap of, colonization. So we're looking for meaningful ways to decolonize our way of learning and to give back their teachings.
For the next project, the students will learn how to make lobster traps to donate to the Mi'kmaq lobster harvesters. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, Halifax.
Time now for another quick break, but stick around. We've got more to come. Welcome back. Edmonton has a new Indigenous radio station. The Aboriginal Multimedia Association of Alberta launched 89.3 The Raven on Monday. Chris Stewart has those details.
Listeners have a new option in Edmonton. 89.3 The Raven launched this week and will feature blues, pop, classic rock, and hip-hop music. The Raven will feature Indigenous artists. Bert Crowfoot is the founder of the Aboriginal Multimedia Society of Alberta. They already have country radio called CFWE. The Raven complements that station. Crowfoot says the first song they played after opening ceremonies was from an icon.
He says it's for the peace of all. He's the one who must decide who's to live and who's to die.
The first song was Buffy St. Marie and Universal Soldier, and we chose that one because of what happened when the middle of her career, when she was blacklisted and wasn't allowed to be even heard because a lot of her activism and a lot of the stuff that she was singing.
Crowfoot says that there will be several languages from Alberta nations used on the Raven. Blackfoot, Cree, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and Michif will all be on the air.
And so we wanted to make sure that people differentiated between the 5 languages. So, for example, we'll say you're listening to the Raven 89.3 and now in the beautiful Cree language. And then they would say the same thing in Cree. So all of our splitters are bilingual. All of our vignettes are bilingual. We have conversational Cree, conversational Nakota.
Crowfoot says already an elder called the program director and thanked the Raven for using his language.
And basically told him, I've lived in the city, and this is the first time I've ever heard Dene on the air. And I am so happy, so pleased that you guys have done this to me, because I'm missing that sound because I'm from up north by high level, and I'm missing my language.
Crowfoot hopes to expand the Raven beyond Edmonton in the future. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Got some pretty great art in that radio station there. Well, that's all the time we have for your APTN National News this weekend. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Warwood. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.